Hello there, and welcome to Sleepy Nights. This is Kevin, and tonight we have a collection of medieval tales. The torches in the great hall of Castle Whitestone guttered in a sudden draught as the massive oak doors swung open. Sir Gareth strode forward, his armour gleaming in the firelight, the sound of his boots echoing across the stone floor. At the far end, King Edmund sat upon his throne, his face a mask of restrained grief. "Your Majesty," Gareth said, dropping to one knee, his head bowed. "I came as soon as I received your summons. The king studied the night before him. Sir Gareth of the Western Marches was not the most renowned of his knights, nor the most politically connected. But he was steadfast, honest, and most importantly, he knew the Black Fang Mountains better than any man alive. "Rise, Sir Gareth," the king commanded, his voice echoing in the vaulted chamber. "You know why I have summoned you." Gareth stood, meeting the king's gaze directly. "Your Majesty, I've only heard rumors." The king's hands tightened on the arms of his throne. "My son, Prince Rowan, has been missing for 3 moons now. The royal hunting party was attacked. Many good men died." His voice remained steady, but his eyes betrayed his pain. "My scouts have found evidence." He signaled, and a servant stepped forward, bearing a small wooden box. Inside lay a child's silver pendant, blackened as if by fire. Beside it rested something far more disturbing, an enormous scale that gleamed like burnished copper. "A lost dragon," Gareth breathed, recognizing the scale from the ancient texts he'd studied as a squire. "Yes," King Edmund confirmed, his voice hard with hatred. "We believed them extinct for a century, but this beast has returned, and it has taken my son." His voice broke before he mastered himself. "I've chosen you, Sir Gareth, because you know these mountains. Your father mapped their passes before you were born. Gareth's mind raced. Dragons were creatures of legend, monsters from his childhood tales. Yet, the evidence lay before him, undeniable. "I will find the prince, my king," he vowed, "and I will end this lost dragon." King Edmund's eyes flashed with grim satisfaction. "Bring me my son, and the dragon's head, Sir Gareth, and you shall have lands and titles beyond what any knight might dream." But as Gareth left the great hall, it was not dreams of reward that filled his thoughts, but the impossibility of his task. To slay a legend and rescue a prince. Stories were full of such quests, but few had happy endings. It was 5 days later. Sir Gareth stood at the base of a cliff face, high in the Black Fang Mountains. The journey had tested even his considerable skill. Narrow ledges, treacherous winds, unexpected snowfall despite the spring season. But the signs had grown clearer with each passing day. Enormous claw marks, scouring the stone, charred remains of mountain goats, and most telling of all, a half-melted knight's dagger bearing the royal crest. Now before him gaped a cave entrance, its mouth wide enough to admit 3 mounted knights riding abreast. Smoke-blackened rocks surrounded the opening, and the smell of sulphur hung in the air. Gareth drew his sword, its familiar weight comforting in his hand. The enchanted blade, blessed by the temple priests and forged with mountain iron, was said to be capable of piercing dragon scales. Whether the old tales were true, he would soon discover. With shield raised, he entered the darkness. A flickering torch held high in his left hand. The passage sloped downward immediately, the floor worn smooth as glass. Signs of the dragon's habitation were everywhere, claw marks scoring the stone walls, the lingering smell of smoke, piles of bones from its meals. But as he descended deeper, Gareth noticed something odd. Scratches in the cave wall that formed pictures. A drawing of a dragon, what appeared to be a small figure with a crown. The passage opened suddenly into an enormous cavern, its ceiling lost in darkness high above. And there, coiled atop a mound of scattered items, some glittering like treasure, others oddly domestic, waited the last dragon of Alberon. The creature was magnificent even in the dim light, copper scales gleaming like newly minted coins, wings folded against its massive body, ancient eyes regarding Gareth with unmistakable intelligence. It rose to its full height, unfurling wings that stretched from one side of the cavern to the other, and released a roar that shook loose stones from the ceiling. "Dragon," Gareth shouted, his voice nearly lost in the creature's thunderous challenge. "Return the king's son." The dragon answered with a blast of flame that Gareth barely deflected with his shield. And so the battle erupted with terrifying intensity. The dragon's fire forced Gareth to dive behind a rock formation. His sword strikes glanced off hardened scales. Both combatants circled, looking for an advantage in the uneven terrain of the cavern floor. Gareth's shoulder burned where claws had found a gap in his armor. The dragon favored one wing, where Gareth's blade had struck true. Neither could gain decisive advantage. Just as Gareth readied himself for a final, desperate charge, a small figure darted between them. "Stop. Please. Stop." A boy of perhaps 7 years, dressed in rough garments, stood with arms outstretched between the knight and the dragon. Despite his wild appearance, the golden circlet still visible beneath tangled hair confirmed what Gareth already knew. This was Prince Rowan. "Please don't hurt her," the prince cried. "Please. She saved me." Both knight and dragon froze, the boy's intervention creating an impossible moment of truce. "Your Highness," Gareth said, lowering his sword slightly, "I've come to return you to your father." "No." The boy backed toward the dragon, who lowered her massive head protectively. "My father doesn't understand. No one does." In the flickering torchlight, Gareth could see that the prince appeared unharmed. Indeed, he seemed healthy and unafraid, despite living in the presence of the kingdom's most feared creature. "She could have killed me many times," Prince Rowan continued, his small hand resting on the dragon's scaled neck with casual familiarity. "But she saved me instead. The bandits killed everyone else. I was lost in the forest for days. When I fell in the snow, I thought I would die. The dragon made a sound unlike anything Gareth had ever heard before. A low rumble that seemed almost gentle, protective. "She brought me here, kept me warm, found food for me," the prince continued. "You see, she's my friend, Sir Knight. She's the last of her kind, all alone in these mountains." Gareth lowered his sword completely, the impossible truth before him challenging everything he'd been told about dragons. "Your father grieves for you, Your Highness. He believes you've taken against your will." I wasn't at first," the boy admitted. "But I choose to stay now. Father would only have her killed." The dragon watched Gareth with ancient, intelligent eyes. Eyes that seemed to understand exactly what hung in the balance. "Your Highness," Gareth said finally, I cannot force you to return against your will, but neither can I leave you here forever. Your father is the king, and you are his only heir. What if... Prince Rowan began hesitantly. What if you told my father what you've seen? That she protected me. That, she's the last of her kind. Gareth shook his head. No. Your father's hatred of dragons runs deep, Your Highness. The wars of your grandfather's time left scars that haven't yet healed. The boy's face fell, but then brightened with sudden inspiration. Then don't tell him you found me just yet. Return with some proof that I'm alive and well. Bring him this. He removed the royal signet ring he wore on a leather cord around his neck. Tell him you've tracked me to these mountains, but need more time. And that will give us more time. Time. Time for what, Your Highness? Time to prepare, the boy said, with unexpected wisdom. I need to show my father that she deserves to live. The dragons aren't the monsters he believes them to be. Gareth studied the earnest face of the prince, the protective stance of the dragon, and the evidence of their peaceful cohabitation around the cavern. Everything he had been taught told him to complete his mission. Slay the dragon, return the prince. But what he saw before him challenged those certainties. I'll return to your father with the ring, Gareth said at last. But, Your Highness, we will need more than time. We will need a plan. The great hall fell silent as Gareth approached the throne. His armor still bearing the marks of his mountain journey. King Edmund leaned forward, eyes flaring with desperate hope. Sir Gareth, you have news of my son? Gareth knelt, drawing forth the signet ring. Your Majesty, I bring proof the prince still lives. I've tracked him to the eastern face of the Black Fang Mountains. The king took the ring with trembling hands. And the dragon. I've seen signs of the creature, Gareth answered truthfully. But I require more time and supplies to complete my mission. The mountains are treacherous, and I believe caution will serve better than haste. King Edmund studied the knight's face. This is just a ring. You've seen my son, spoken with him. I've seen evidence he moves freely and he lives, Gareth replied, choosing his words very carefully. I believe with more time I can ensure his safe return. After a long moment, the king nodded. 2 weeks, Sir Gareth. Take what men and supplies you may need. Your Majesty, with respect, this mission requires stealth rather than force. I would go alone, as I have been. The king's eyes narrowed, but he nodded. 2 weeks, not a day more. As Gareth left the great hall, he felt the weight of another pair of eyes upon him. Sir Darian, the king's champion, watched from the shadows, his expression unreadable. Gareth had never trusted the man. Too hungry for glory, too quick to volunteer for missions that would bring him recognition. For now, though, Gareth had more immediate concerns. Your father has given us 2 weeks, Gareth explained to Prince Rowan upon his return to the cave. 2 weeks, no more. The prince sat cross-legged beside the dragon he called Ember, sharing a meal of roasted mountain hare. The great beast had accepted Gareth's presence with wary tolerance, seeming to understand that the knight now posed no immediate threat. Then we must be ready, Rowan said. I've thought about what to do. Father needs to meet Ember himself, to see that she's gentle and wise. Gareth shook his head. Your father would never come alone to such a meeting. He would bring knights, archers. It would be a trap, Your Highness. Then we must convince him before he comes, the prince insisted. Show him that the dragons were never the monsters our stories claim. And so, over the following days, an unlikely alliance formed between the knight, the prince, and the dragon. While Ember hunted in the high peaks, Gareth and Rowan explored deeper into the cave system. And what they discovered changed everything Gareth thought he knew about dragons. In a chamber far from the main cavern, ancient drawings covered the walls. Not childish scratches, but sophisticated images, showing dragons and humans working together, farming, building, even healing. Dragons breathing controlled flame to forge metal. Humans riding dragons through skies filled with stars. These must be thousands of years old, Gareth marveled, his torch illuminating page after page of history no human had seen for centuries. Even more remarkable were the scrolls they found, preserved in stone containers. Writings in an ancient human dialect that Gareth could partially decipher from his studies. They spoke of a time when dragons and humans lived in harmony, before wars and misunderstandings drove them apart. This changes everything, Gareth said. These scrolls, these drawings, they prove dragons weren't always our enemies. The prince nodded eagerly. Now, we just need to convince Father. Gareth began preparing the prince for the inevitable meeting with his father. They practiced what Rowan would say, how he would explain his time with Ember. The dragon, for her part, seemed to understand the gravity of their plan, allowing Rowan to demonstrate how she would behave in the king's presence. Meanwhile, Gareth created packages of evidence, carefully selected scrolls, drawings copied from the cave walls, even a small chest of dragon scales Ember had shed naturally. Each night, he would leave these where the king's scouts might find them, gradually preparing the ground for the truth. But fate rarely allows for perfect plans. On the 10th day, as Gareth returned from placing another evidence package, he spotted movement on the path below. Armor glinting in the afternoon sun. Sir Darian, leading a small party of knights, ascending the mountain. Gareth raced back to the cave, his heart pounding. "We've been discovered," he told Rowan and Ember. "The king's champion approaches with men." "How?" the prince asked, his face pale. "We've been so careful." Darian must have grown suspicious. He's always resented me. Gareth checked his sword. He was jealous that I received this job. You should hide deeper in the cave while I intercept them. But the prince shook his head. "No. If they found us, they'll keep coming. It's time for my plan, ready or not." "Your Highness, I am still your prince," Rowan said firmly. "And I say we stand our ground. Ember will not harm them unless they attack first. I will speak to Sir Darian. Make him understand." Against better judgment, Gareth agreed. They positioned themselves at the cave entrance, the prince in front, Gareth at his side, Ember visible but not threatening within the shadow of the cave mouth. When Sir Darian's party rounded the final bend in the path and saw them, chaos erupted. Knights drew swords, archers knocked arrows, and Darian himself shouted in triumph. "Stand aside, Sir Gareth. The prince is bewitched by the beast." "I am not bewitched," Rowan called back. "Ember saved me. She's been protecting me." "Lies spread by the creature's magic," Darian spat. "Your father sent me to finish what the traitor Sir Gareth would not." He raised his sword. "Men, prepare to..." "You will listen to me." The prince's voice rang with authority that belied his years. "I am Rowan, son of Edmund, heir to the throne of Alberon. And I command you to lower your weapons." Perhaps it was the shock of hearing such command from a child, or perhaps some vestige of loyalty to the royal bloodline. But the knights hesitated. Darian's sword remained high, but the others lowered their weapons slightly. The dragon could have killed me many times, Rowan continued, stepping forward. Instead, she saved me from death in the snow, fed me, protected me. Everything my father believes about dragons is wrong. They were once our allies, not our enemies. Darian sneered. Childish fantasy. Stand aside, Your Highness. Let us do our duty. Your duty is to me, Rowan replied. And I say you will not harm this dragon. And for a tense moment, no one moved. Then, Darian signaled his men. Take the prince, kill the beast, and the traitor. As the knights advanced, Ember moved with unexpected speed, placing herself between the threat and Prince Rowan. Gareth drew his sword, standing firm beside her. The prince refused to move, his small figure dwarfed by the confrontation around him. But before the first blow could fall, a horn blast echoed across the mountainside. All eyes turned to see a much larger force ascending the path, and at its head, the unmistakable figure of King Edmund himself. Father, Rowan cried. Darian turned, surprised but quickly composing himself. Your Majesty, we found the prince. The dragon has him in its thrall, and Sir Gareth has betrayed you. Silence, the king commanded, his eyes fixed on his son, standing unharmed before a creature from a nightmare. Silence all. Rowan, are you well? I am, Father, the prince called back. Please, call off your men. Let me explain. The king raised his hand, halting his forces. He dismounted, approaching slowly, his hand on his sword. Explain quickly, my son. That beast stands behind you, ready to strike. She has never hurt me, Rowan said. She saved me when I was lost in the mountains. Everything you believe about dragons is wrong, Father. The boy gestured to Gareth. Show him what we found. Gareth stepped forward cautiously, producing the ancient scrolls and drawings they had discovered. Your Majesty, these were hidden deep in the cave. They show a different history than the one we've been taught. Dragons and humans once lived in peace. The king barely glanced at the evidence, his eyes never leaving the dragon. A clever deception. Dragons are killers, boy. They destroyed entire villages in your grandfather's time. Because we hunted them first, Rowan cried. We drove them from their lands, killed their young. This is the last dragon, Father. The very last. And she chose mercy over vengeance when she found me. King Edmund's face hardened. Stand aside, Rowan. I'll not ask again. I will not, the prince replied, tears streaming down his face. If you want to kill her, you'll have to kill me first. The king blanched. Bewitchment, just as Darian said. Archers. A dozen bows raised in unison. Gareth moved to shield the prince, but Rowan stood firm, his arms outstretched before Ember. Father, please. What happened next would later be told and retold throughout the kingdom. As the king raised his hand to give the order to fire, a whistling sound cut through the air. From the ridge above, arrows flew, not from the king's men, but from hidden positions in the rocks. Bandits, dozens of them, had used the confrontation as cover to surround the royal party. The same bandits, Gareth realized with sudden clarity, who had attacked the royal hunting party months before. The first volley felled 3 of the king's knights. The second was aimed directly at King Edmund himself. Without hesitation, Ember the dragon launched from her position, her massive wings carrying her forward with incredible speed. She placed her body between the king and the incoming arrows, roaring in pain as they struck her scales. "Father," Rowan cried, running to the king. For a frozen moment, King Edmund stared in disbelief at the dragon that had just saved his life. Then, battle erupted around them as bandits swarmed down from the ridges. Knights fought desperately against the unexpected attack. Darian proved his worth, his sword claiming 3 bandits in quick succession. Gareth found himself fighting back to back with men who had moments before been prepared to kill him. But it was Ember who turned the tide. The dragon rose into the air despite her wounds, raining fire upon the bandit positions, careful to avoid the king's men. Her massive tail swept attackers from the narrow path. Her claws tore through those who came too close. When the last bandit fell, an uneasy quiet descended upon the mountainside. Ember landed heavily near the cave entrance, blood flowing from a dozen arrow wounds. Rowan ran to her side, tears flowing freely now. "Help her," he begged his father. "Please." King Edmund stood motionless, his worldview visibly crumbling as he processed what he had witnessed. The dragon he had come to kill had saved his life, protected his son, fought alongside his knights. His eyes met Gareth's. "You knew." It wasn't a question. I discovered the truth, Your Majesty," Gareth replied. "As you have today." The king approached the wounded dragon slowly, his hand no longer on his sword. Ember watched him with pain-clouded eyes, but made no threatening move. "You saved my son," King said quietly. "And now, you've saved me as well." He knelt beside the great creature, touching one of the wounds gently. "Master Darian, fetch the royal physician quickly." Darian stared in disbelief. "Your Majesty, you cannot mean to. I said quickly." king roared, his authority brooking no argument. As the physician worked to remove arrows and treat Ember's wounds, the king sat with his son, listening at last to the full story of his rescue. Gareth showed him the ancient scrolls and drawings, explaining their significance. All this time, King Edmund said finally, our histories were wrong, or deliberately falsified. Not entirely, Father, Rowan said. There were wars between humans and dragons, terrible ones. But they weren't always our enemies. He looked at Ember with unbridled affection. And they don't have to be in the future. The king was silent for a long moment, weighing centuries of belief against the evidence of his own eyes. Well, what would you have me do, my son? Let her live in peace, Rowan said immediately. Establish these mountains as a sanctuary, and let me visit her. He hesitated. I know I must return to the castle, to my duties. But Ember is my friend. I won't abandon her. King Edmund looked to Gareth. And you, Sir Knight, what would you counsel? Gareth considered carefully. A new beginning, Your Majesty. A chance to right ancient wrongs. Perhaps one day, if there are more dragons, to rebuild what was lost between our kinds. Three days later, when Ember's wounds had begun to heal, a remarkable procession descended from the mountains. At its head rode King Edmund with Prince Rowan before him on his saddle. Behind them came Sir Gareth, carrying the ancient dragon scrolls. And most remarkably of all, walking with careful dignity despite her injuries, came Ember. The people of the nearest village fled indoors, the sight of a living dragon approaching with their king. But as days passed and Ember remained peaceful, curiosity overcame fear. Children were the first to approach, marveling at her scales and gentle demeanor. The adults followed more cautiously. True to his word, King Edmund established the Black Fang Mountains as royal sanctuary. No dragon would be hunted there, no scales harvested, no eggs stolen. In time, watchtowers were built along the borders, manned by a new order of knights, dedicated to protecting the sanctuary and its sole inhabitant. Sir Gareth, having proven both his courage and wisdom, was appointed first knight of the Dragon Guard. His duty was not only to protect Ember, but to study the ancient scrolls and drawings, to recover the lost knowledge of human-dragon cooperation. Prince Rowan divided his time between royal duties at the castle and visits to his dragon friend. Under Gareth's guidance, he too studied the ancient knowledge, preparing for a day when he would rule, perhaps oversee a new era of peace between the species. And Ember, no longer the last dragon hiding in fear, took to the skies above her sanctuary, her copper scales gleaming in the sunlight. Living legend reborn from the shadows of myth. Many years later, when Prince Rowan had grown into a young man, and Sir Gareth's hair had begun to grey, Ember led them to a hidden chamber deep within her mountain home. There, nestled in a bed of heated stones, lay 3 large eggs, their shells gleaming with iridescent patterns. She wasn't the last after all, Gareth marveled, understanding at last why Ember had been so fiercely protective of her cave. Rowan placed a gentle hand on one egg, feeling the life stirring within. Not the last, he agreed. The first. Inside the medieval apothecary shop, dried herbs hung from weathered ceiling beams in neat bundles. A fire crackled beneath bubbling copper pots, filling the air with the sweet scent of healing brews. The apothecary worked methodically in the dim light, grinding leaves with his mortar and pestle, while checking each jar's contents against his inventory list. Rain pelted the leaded glass windows as evening settled over the town. He paused his work, listening to the steady drumming. The storm had grown fierce enough to drive most townspeople indoors, leaving the narrow streets empty, save for the occasional hurried vicar rushing past his shop. The shelves around him held countless glass vials, each labeled in his careful hand. Some contained common remedies: feverfew, chamomile, willow bark. while others held rarer substances, their contents gleaming mysteriously in the firelight. A collection of surgical tools lay clean and ready on a worn wooden table, their polished surfaces reflecting the warm glow of fat burning lamps. It was then that the door burst open with a gust of wind and rain. A knight staggered in, one hand pressed onto their side, the other steadying themselves against the doorframe. Water dripped from their armor onto the stone floor. "I require treatment," the knight said, voice muffled by their helmet. Despite the obvious pain, they remained rigidly upright. The apothecary moved quickly to examine the wound. "You'll need to remove some armor. The cut needs proper cleaning." "No." The knight stepped back. "Bind it as it is. I cannot remove the armor." "That will lead to infection. At least let me. Just bind it," the knight insisted, tension clear in their voice. I can pay well." The apothecary frowned, but gathered his supplies. As he approached with clean bandages, he noticed the quality of the armor. Fine steel worked with subtle details that marked royal craftsmanship. Yet there were no identifying marks or heraldry. An unusual combination that raised questions he knew better than to ask. Thunder rolled overhead as he began his work, the night remaining silent and still beneath his hands. The wound was deep, but clean, made by a sharp blade rather than a ragged weapon. Another detail that didn't match the typical tavern brawl or bandit attack. But that, too, he kept to himself. He worked carefully in the flickering light, cleaning what he could reach of the wound through gaps in the armor. The knight's breathing was measured but strained, each small movement carefully controlled. Despite their rigid posture, he could sense their growing weakness. whatever had caused this wound, the knight was far from safety, and refusing proper treatment would only worsen their condition. As he reached for more bandages, a flash of lightning illuminated the shop. In that brief moment, he caught a glimpse of something that made him pause. A subtle pattern etched into the armor's shoulder plate. One he'd definitely seen before in the royal court's guard. But before he could process this detail, thunder crashed overhead, and the knight swayed slightly, their composed facade beginning to crack. The apothecary bent closer to examine the wound, frowning as he noticed an unusual purple tinge at its edges. His fingers froze. He knew that color, a telltale sign of nightshade-based poison, the kind used exclusively by royal assassins. The wound is poisoned, he said quietly, straightening up. You need the armor off. Now. The knight stiffened. Impossible. Just bind it, and He'll be dead by dawn. He moved to his shelves, quickly gathering ingredients. The poison's already spreading. See how your fingers tremble? The knight looked down at their gauntleted hand, now visibly shaking. You're certain? Purple-tipped nightshade. Royal court poison. I've seen it before. He began grinding herbs with swift, practiced movements. It'll reach your heart within hours, without treatment. Thunder crashed outside as the knight seemed to wage an internal battle. Finally, they spoke, voice weaker than before. You cannot tell anyone what you see. I take confidences seriously, but we're wasting time. The knight struggled with the armor clasps, movements growing clumsy. The apothecary stepped forward to help, carefully removing the chest plate. The wound beneath was worse than he thought. Purple veins spreading outward like dark lightning. The helmet, he insisted, mixing herbs into a paste. The poison will affect your mind soon. I will need to check your eyes for. The night swayed suddenly, catching themselves against a table. Vials rattled. No, I cannot. You can, and you must. He stepped closer, voice firm. Now. With trembling hands, the knight reached for their helmet. There was a moment of hesitation. Then they lifted it away. Long dark hair fell free, framing a face the apothecary had never thought to see again. Despite the years between then and now, he knew those eyes immediately. The princess held his gaze, chin lifted despite her obvious weakness. Hello, Thomas, she said softly. He stared, words failing him. The girl he'd loved in secret, the princess who'd been his childhood friend until duty separated them. She stood before him now, poisoned and in disguise. Your Highness, he managed finally, healer's instincts warring with shock. She stumbled then, poison taking its toll. He caught her automatically. Years of formality forgotten in urgency. She felt smaller without the armor, more like the girl he remembered. Well, she said, attempting a weak smile. This isn't quite how I imagined seeing you again. The poison's purple traces were spreading visibly now. Dark veins creeping up her neck. Her skin had taken on a grayish tinge, and her breathing grew more labored. Thomas pushed aside his shock and confusion. forcing himself to focus on the immediate threat. "We must act quickly," he said, guiding her to a chair. "The poison is spreading faster than I feared." He turned back to his workbench, hands moving swiftly among his supplies. "I need to know exactly when you were wounded." I think 2 hours ago," she managed, gripping the chair's arms as another wave of dizziness hit. 2 hours ago, just outside the city's walls. Thomas calculated quickly. 2 hours. The poison would reach her heart by dawn. Less time than he'd hoped, but enough if they worked quickly. He refused to consider the alternative. Not when he just found her again. Even under these impossible circumstances. "Stay with me," he urged, reaching for his strongest antidote herbs. "We have work to do." Thomas worked quickly at his bench, crushing herbs with shaking hands as he tried to process the reality before him. The Princess Elizabeth sat watching him, her beautiful face growing paler by the minute. "I need to know what really happened," he said, keeping his voice steady. Still direct as ever. She managed a weak laugh that turned into a cough. "Some things haven't changed." "Many things have changed, Your Highness." He emphasized the title slightly, measuring dried foxglove with careful precision. Don't as another wave of dizziness hit. Please, don't call me that. Not here. Not now. He added the foxglove to his mortar, grinding it perhaps harder than necessary. What should I call you then? The knight who burst into my shop? The princess who vanished from court without a word? The girl who... He stopped himself, focusing on the herbs. The girl who broke your heart. Her voice was quiet. We need to focus on the poison, he said firmly, though his hand had stilled. I am seeing signs of nightshade, but there's something else. Something that's making it spread faster. She nodded, professional despite her growing weakness. Monkshood, probably. They've been experimenting with combinations. They? Who exactly is trying to kill you, Elizabeth? She met his gaze, and for a moment he saw past the years of separation to the girl who used to sneak out of the castle gardens to meet him. Members of my court, my own court. I've been investigating corruption, getting too close to the truth, apparently. Thomas turned back to his workbench, adding ingredients to a copper pot, heating over the fire. The familiar motions helped steady him. That explains the disguise. Oh, I never thought I'd see you in armor. You'd be surprised what I've learned to do. She watched him work, eyes growing unfocused. I needed to become more than just a princess in a tower. And now, you're a poisoned knight in an apothecary shop. He stirred the mixture, trying to keep his tone light despite his growing concern. The poison was now spreading faster. "At least," she said softly, "at least it brought me back to you." He nearly dropped his spoon, but before he could respond, she slumped forward, consciousness finally giving way to the poison's effects. Thomas caught her just before she hit the floor, his heart racing with both old feelings and new fear. The antidote wasn't ready, and time was running out. "You need to stay awake," Thomas said, supporting Elizabeth as she stirred back to consciousness. "The antidote requires multiple stages, and I need your help." She blinked, forcing her eyes to focus. Then tell me what to do. He helped her to the workbench, keeping one arm around her waist as she swayed. "First, we need to counteract the nightshade. Then, the monk's hood. But something's making them work together unusually well." As he worked, combining ingredients with swift precision, Elizabeth watched his hands. "You were always good at this. Even in the castle gardens, you knew every plant's purpose." "The poison's affecting your mind," he said quietly. "It's making you speak thoughts you'd usually keep hidden." "Truth serum," she managed, a weak laugh. "Of course. They are clever." She gripped the bench as another wave of dizziness hit. "Though perhaps not as clever as they think." Thomas added crushed belladonna berries to his mixture, trying to focus on the task rather than her words. "This first stage needs to simmer for exactly 7 minutes," keep you alert. Remember how we used to count stars in the garden? The words tumbled out before she could stop them. Every night, until they called me back inside. He kept stirring, jaw tight. Elizabeth, I kept every letter you sent me, she continued, the truth serum loosening her tongue. Even after I had to stop replying. Father's orders, of course. A princess couldn't be seen corresponding with a commoner. His voice was sharp, but his hands remained steady as he measured out the next ingredients. With anyone who made me happy. She reached for a jar he needed. They were afraid I'd choose differently. Choose you. The mixture bubbled, giving off purple steam. Thomas added powdered herbs, counting under his breath. You made your choice clear enough. Did I? Her voice crackled. Or did I just do what was expected? What they told me would keep you safe. He paused, looking at her properly for the first time since the revelation. Keep me safe. They threatened to have you removed from the city. Permanently. The truth spilled out like water. I couldn't be the reason. Thomas's hands stilled on the mortar. So, you pushed me away instead. It seemed kinder than having you killed. She smiled bitterly. Though watching you leave nearly killed me anyway. The mixture turned a dangerous red. Thomas quickly added more herbs, forcing himself to focus. The monk's hood is reaching your heart. We need to work faster. She nodded, then stumbled. He caught her again, and for a moment, they were too close. Years of separation evaporating in shared breath. I never stopped, she whispered, the truth serum pulling words from her heart. Loving you, I mean. Thomas's hands tightened on her arms. Elizabeth, the poison is making me honest. Finally. She met his gaze steadily despite her weakness. Every time I heard news of your success, your healing work, I was so proud and so lonely. He helped her back to her chair, movements gentle despite his turmoil. We need to focus on saving your life. The past is right here. She interrupted. In this shop, with both of us finally speaking truth. The antidote bubbled, demanding attention. Thomas returned to his work, adding the final ingredients with trembling hands. If you survive this, what then? You're still a princess. I'm still the man I should have fought for. Her voice was growing weaker, but her words remained clear. Perhaps that's why I'm here. The poison brought me back to you, but the truth serum, that's showing me what I need to do next. The antidote turned a clear, bright blue. Thomas lifted it from the fire, heart pounding with more than just urgency. It's ready. But Elizabeth, the things you're saying are what I've wanted to say for years. She reached for the antidote with shaken hands. Now, you going to help me live long enough to prove it? The final stage is complicated, Thomas said, holding the bright blue antidote. It requires blood from both of us. A binding agent. Elizabeth's eyes widened slightly. You mean blood magic? I wouldn't have thought you'd... I learned many things. After leaving, he replied, preparing a small knife. Some less orthodox than others. The candlelight cast dancing shadows as he carefully cut his palm, letting drops fall into the antidote. The liquid hissed and darkened. Your turn, he said softly, offering her the knife. Their fingers brushed as she took it. The truth serum's getting stronger, she warned. Whatever I say next, then perhaps we should work quickly. But he didn't move away as she made her cut. Their blood mixing in the potion. The antidote began to glow, casting their faces in ethereal light. There are positions, she said suddenly, words rushing out. At court, a royal physician is needed. Someone trusted. Someone who could work closely with the princess. Thomas still. Elizabeth, I've watched you build this. She gestured at his shop. Your independence, your reputation. I know what I'm asking you to give up. Do you? His voice was rough. Last time I was at court was different. I was different. She gripped his arm, leaving a small, bloody handprint. I'm not that scared girl anymore. I'm offering you a choice this time, not taking it away. The antidote pulsed between them, growing brighter. And what of your court conspirators? be dealt with. But I need. She swayed slightly, poison still coursing through her. I need someone I can trust. Someone who knows both medicine and truth. Thomas looked at their mixed blood in the glowing potion. Years of longing, warring with hard-earned wisdom. The court nearly destroyed us once. Then help me change it. Her eyes were bright, not just as my physician, as my partner, The word hung unspoken between them as Thomas lifted the antidote. Drink first. Live. Then we'll discuss terms. She took the vial with trembling hands. I mean every word. Poison or no poison. I know, he said softly. That's what terrifies me. The antidote glowed brighter as she drank. Their mingled blood carrying healing through her veins. The purple traces of poison began to fade from her skin. But the truth serum's effects intensified. I dream of you, she confessed, words spilling out. Dreams of what could have been, of what still could be. Thomas turned away, checking her pulse. Professional mask slipping. Elizabeth, please. No, listen. She caught his hand. Their blood still mingling. I'm offering you more than a position. I'm offering you a way to stay. To be near me without suspicion. To help me make real change. And if I refuse, then I'll respect your choice. But know this. I'm not leaving your life again. Position or no position. I'll find ways to see you, to work with you, He pressed a finger to her lips, stopping the flow of truth. The antidote needs time to work. Rest But she gripped his wrist, moving his hand away. No more waiting. No more silence. The poison brought me here. But this truth serum is making me brave. I love you, Thomas. Still. Always. And I'm tired of pretending duty means denying my heart. Thunder crashed outside as Thomas struggled with her words, with the reality of this moment. The princess he'd loved and lost, now offering him everything he'd ever dreamed of. But at what cost? Your life at the court, he began carefully. Your responsibilities will be easier with someone I trust at my side. She touched his face, her hand still bearing traces of their mingled blood. Someone who knows both healing and truth. Someone who can help me transform the court instead of being transformed by it. The antidote's glow was fading, but something else was growing stronger between them. Something that had survived years of separation, duty, and denial. Dawn comes soon, he said finally. The antidote will need watching through the night. She smiled, reading acceptance in his words. Then we have hours yet to plan our future. The storm raged outside, but inside the shop, truth and healing worked their magic as two hearts once torn apart found their way back to each other. Thomas hovered beside Elizabeth, watching the slow return of color to her cheeks. The antidote had finally purged the poison from her system. She breathed more easily now, though an exhausted tremor still ran through her limbs. That was close, he murmured, pressing the back of his hand to her forehead. The feverish heat had receded, leaving her skin cool and clammy. Another hour, and I might have been too late. She managed a small, wry smile. Then I owe you my life, again. He shook his head. You should rest. But even as she tried to lean back, Her eyes darted around the apothecary, settling on her discarded armor. I can't stay here. My enemies will think they've won if I don't return to court. Thomas exhaled. You nearly died tonight. Give yourself time. She pushed herself upright. Time is exactly what I don't have. There's corruption in the palace. People who'd stop at nothing to see me out of the picture for good. If I'm gone too long, they'll move unopposed. Her gaze flicked to him. That's why I need you. He looked away, torn. I left to avoid these very intrigues. You know that better than anyone. I do, she said softly. Finally, Thomas reached for her hand. If you return to court, you'll be in danger every moment. I'm in danger wherever I go. She met his eyes, determination etched on her face. All I can do is meet it head on, with help from someone I trust. The words set his heart pounding. What exactly do you want me to do? I'm offering you royal physician. I trust no one else with my health or the kingdom's. Thomas let out a long breath. The memory of the council's cold marble halls tightened his chest. That's a big step. You know how they'll talk if you bring me back. Then let them talk. The only thing I care about is whether you'll accept. He thought of the early years, when they were barely more than children, roaming the palace gardens, when he shouldn't have even been there. But he couldn't lose her again. Not like this. I'll do it. If it means I can keep you alive, and maybe root out the source of these attacks. I'll return to court. She squeezed his hand, a spark of that old warmth flaring between them. Thank you. I promise. This time, it'll be different. He helped her to her feet, and she tested her balance. The deep cut still twinged, but she stood taller with each breath, pressing one hand against fresh bandages. We need a plan. My father will demand answers about this wound. Thomas bent to retrieve her breastplate, carefully setting it on a table. We'll say you were ambushed outside the city walls. That's not far from the truth. As for the rest, we'll keep our findings to ourselves until we know who's behind the poison. She nodded, taking a measured step forward. Yes, we'll move quietly. Together. A faint pink light from the rising sun crept through the apothecary windows, illuminating the worn stone floor. The storm had blown over, leaving a hushed calm in its wake. Outside, a new day beckoned. Elizabeth met Thomas's gaze, and for a moment they were neither princess nor apothecary, but two souls who drifted apart and now stood on the brink of something new. She lifted her chin. Shall we? Thomas paused, letting the old fears and new hopes settle in his chest. Then he offered her a soft, resolute smile, the kind he once gave her as a boy. Lead the way, Your Highness. And side by side, they stepped out into the dawn. Despite the challenges awaiting them, palace conspiracies, suspicious courtiers, and the burden of old wounds, they carried a shared resolve to face it all together. For the first time in years, Thomas felt not only the pull of duty, but the promise of what might be if they dared to claim it. The sun had barely begun to peek over the horizon, its pale light flickering through the dense canopy of leaves, casting shadows on the forest floor. The air was cool and damp, heavy with the earthy scent of moss and decaying foliage. A light mist curled between the trees, wreathing the undergrowth in a ghostly shroud. Through this ethereal landscape walked a young man, his lean, muscular frame moving with the easy grace of one born to the wilderness. His simple homespun tunic and breeches, patched and worn from long use, did little to disguise the coiled strength in his limbs, or the keen intelligence in his piercing blue eyes. A shock of unruly dark hair framed his angular face, still boyish, despite the faint shadow of stubble on his jaw. At his back hung a long bow of polished yew, a quiver of arrows, their fletching of goose feathers grey in the dim light, bounced against his hip as he walked. The bow was a magnificent weapon, almost taller than the man himself, and in his hands it seemed to be almost an extension of his body, so natural was his grip upon it. This was Robin, a mere lad of 18 summers, yet already possessed a skill with a bow that was the talk of the village. Born on the edge of Sherwood Forest, he had grown up learning the ways of the wood, his keen senses attuned to every shift in the breeze, every rustle of leaves. He had learned how to hunt, to track, to read the signs that others had witnessed, and in time, the forest had become as familiar to him as the lines on his own palm. Despite the hardships of life in the 12th century, with its constant struggles against disease and hunger, Robin's early years were marked by a sense of joy and freedom. He roamed the forests with friends, hunting small game, practicing their skills with bow and staff, reveling in the simple pleasures of youth. Yet, even as he laughed and played, Robin could not help but be aware of the darker currents that swirled around him. The nobles and the clergy, with their grand castles and sprawling estates, seemed to exist in a world apart from the common people, a world of privilege and plenty that stood in stark contrast to the grinding poverty and toil of the peasantry. As Robin made his way deeper into the forest, the trees seemed to close in around him, their branches interlacing overhead to form a living roof that blocked out the growing light of dawn. The mist grew thicker, swirling around his legs like a living thing. Yet Robin moved through it all with a sure-footed confidence, his steps guided by an innate sense of direction that never failed him. He had set out early that morning, slipping out from his cramped cottage that he shared with the rest of his family. They were still asleep as he crept out into the pre-dawn gloom, his bow in hand, and a sense of excitement thrumming in his veins. Today was the day of the sheriff's archery tournament, a grand spectacle that drew competitors from all over the Shire, and Robin was determined to win. It wasn't the prize that motivated him. though the thought of a whole barrel of rich October ale was certainly enticing. No, what drove Robin was the desire to prove himself. He had spent countless hours practicing in the woods, honing his skills until he could shoot an arrow through the hanging ring at 100 paces. He knew he was good. Perhaps he might be the best in the land. As he walked, Robin's mind drifted to stories he had heard around the hearth fire at night. Tales of great heroes of old who had won fame and fortune through their deeds of valor. He thought of Lancelot and Gawain, of Tristan and Galahad, and he felt a stirring in his chest, a yearning to be like them, to be more than just another peasant scratching out a living in the shadow of great lords and ladies. The snap of a twig jolted Robin from his reverie, and he froze, his hand going instinctively to his knife at his belt. He scanned the undergrowth, his senses straining for any sign of danger. There were outlaws in these woods, men who had been driven to desperation by poverty and injustice, and who now preyed on travellers and merchants alike. Robin had no desire to meet such men, armed with only his bow and a handful of arrows. But after a long moment of tense silence, he relaxed, shaking his head at his own jumpiness. It was just a deer or a fox, startled by his passing. Nothing to worry about. He resumed his journey, his strides lengthening as the sun began to burn through the mist. But as he walked, he suddenly caught the sound of voices coming from a nearby glade. Curious, Robin crept closer, keeping to the shadows of the trees. As he peered into the clearing, he saw a group of men seated around a great oak tree, making merry with a feast of pies and ales. They were a rough-looking bunch. They seemed to be enjoying themselves immensely. As Robin approached the group, one of them called out to him, a sneer on his face. "Well, well, what do we have here? A young pup with a toy bow thinking he's a man?" Robin felt his anger rising, but he kept his voice steady. "I'm no pup," he said, meeting the man's gaze. "And this is no toy. I'm on my way to the archery tournament in Nottingham to compete with the best archers in the land." The men laughed, a harsh, mocking sound that echoed through the trees. "You," one of them said, taking a swig from a flagon of ale. You think you can compete with grown men? You'll be lucky to even hit the target, let alone win the prize. Robin's grip tightened on his bow, his knuckles turning white. I'll wager you 20 marks that I can hit any mark at 70 yards, he said, his voice ringing with challenge. I'll outshoot any man here. The men exchanged glances, their eyes glinting with cruel amusement. A bold claim, boy, one of them said. But we see no targets here, just a bunch of trees and a herd of deer in the distance. Robin's gaze flicked to the deer in the distance, his mind working quickly. The deer, then, he said, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. I'll wager 20 marks that I can bring down the finest hart in the herd with a single shot from my bow. The men laughed again, but this time there was an edge to their laughter, a hint of unease beneath the bravado. You're on then, boy, one of them said, tossing a purse of coins onto the ground. 20 marks says you can't even hit the beast, let alone kill it. Robin nodded, his eyes never leaving the herd. He reached for an arrow, his movements smooth and practiced, and knocked it to the string. He raised the bow, drawing the string back to his ear, and took a deep breath, steadying himself. For a moment, the glade was silent. The only sound the distant rustling of leaves in the breeze. Then, with a sharp twang, Robin let the arrow fly. It flew straight and true, a blur of motion too fast for the eye to follow. It struck the noblest deer in the herd, piercing its heart and felling it to the ground. The other deer scattered, their hoofs thundering against the earth as they fled. Robin lowered his bow, a triumphant grin on his face. Well, he said, turning to the stunned foresters, how was that shot, my friends? As the men stared at the fallen deer, their expressions morphed from shock to anger. The man who had made the wager turned to Robin, his face contorted with rage. You fool, he spat. Do you have any idea what you've done? That was the king's deer you just killed. Another man chimed in, his voice just as heated. "Aye, by the laws of our sovereign King Henry, the penalty for poaching the king's game is death." Robin felt a chill run down his spine, but he forced himself to remain calm. He hadn't considered the consequences of his actions, so caught up in the thrill of the challenge. "I meant no harm," he said, his voice half steady despite the pounding of his heart. "I only sought to prove my skill with the bow." The first man sneered, his hand still resting on the hilt of his knife. "Your skill? Listen, lad, you've just signed your own death warrant. The Sheriff of Nottingham will have your head for this." "Catch him!" cried another man, reaching for his own bow. But before Robin could react, the first man had drawn an arrow from his quiver and knocked it to his bowstring. "I'll have your blood for this, boy," he growled, taking aim at Robin's heart. Robin's eyes widened as the man loosened the arrow, its deadly point streaking towards him. He twisted at the last moment, feeling the rush of air as the arrow flew past, missing him by mere inches. Anger and fear surged through Robin's veins, and he reacted on instinct. In one smooth motion, he drew an arrow from his own quiver, knocked it to his bow, and took aim at the man. "You said I was no archer," he cried, his voice ringing through the glade. "But say so now again." He let the arrow go, and it flew straight and true, striking the man in the chest. The man stumbled backwards, a look of shock and pain on his face, and then he fell to the ground. Robin's arrow lodged deep in his heart. For a moment, the other men stood frozen, staring at their fallen comrade in disbelief. Then, with a roar of rage, they turned on Robin, drawing their weapons and advancing on him with murder in their eyes. Robin knew he had only one choice. He turned and fled, plunging into the forest as the men gave chase. Arrows whizzed past his head, thudding into tree trunks and burying themselves into the underbush. But Robin was quick and agile, dodging and weaving between the trees as he ran. And he kept going, pushing deeper and deeper into the thicket, until at last he burst out from the other side, gasping for breath and bleeding from a dozen small cuts. He paused for a moment, listening intently. He could no longer hear the men chasing him. He had lost them, for now at least. He was exhausted, and he collapsed against the trunk of a massive oak tree, his chest heaving as he gulped in air. For a long time, he simply sat there, staring blankly into the forest as the reality of what he had done washed over him. He had killed a man, taken a life in a moment of anger and fear. The weight of that knowledge settled on his shoulders like a physical burden, threatening to crush him. "What have I done?" he whispered, his voice ragged with despair. "I am a murderer, a sinner in the eyes of God and man alike." But even as the words left his lips, another voice seemed to whisper in his ear. It said, "You did what you had to do. You struck a blow against tyranny and oppression, even if it meant sacrificing your own innocence." Robin shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. He knew he could not go back to his old life now. He was an outlaw, a fugitive. Perhaps, in the depths of Sherwood Forest, he could find a new purpose. For the Sheriff of Nottingham, the law was but a tool in his arsenal, a means to exert control and assert dominance over the Shire. The death of Guy of Gisborne, a forester, and not merely a subordinate, but his own blood kin, ignited a fire within him. This was the man that Robin had killed. Guy had been more than a favoured lieutenant. He was a confidant, a reflection of the sheriff's own ruthlessness and disdain for those beneath their station. The news of Guy's demise at the hands of a common outlaw did not just stir anger in the sheriff. It provoked a tempest of vengeance that raged through the corridors of his stone-cold heart. Seated upon his high-backed chair, draped with furs that spoke of wealth and status, the sheriff's presence dominated the room. His features, sharp and imposing, like the fortress he commanded, were etched with lines of authority and a life spent in the pursuit of power. His eyes, dark and piercing, scanned the faces of his men at arms, each one a seasoned warrior yet none immune to the palpable fear that the sheriff instilled. The air grew thick, charged with tension as he spoke. His voice, a menacing growl that seemed to echo off the ancient walls. I want this Robin Hood found and brought before me, he commanded, his words laced with a venom that left no room for dissent. I want him to suffer for what he has done. I want him to feel the full weight of my vengeance. The promise of a bounty of £200 for Robin's capture, dead or alive, was not a gesture of generosity. It was a testament to the depth of the sheriff's desire for retribution. A price set upon vengeance itself. The sheriff's men, a collection of soldiers and mercenaries whose loyalty was as much to gold as to any lord or law, exchanged uneasy glances. They were well acquainted with the perils of Sherwood Forest, a realm where shadows moved with the stealth of outlaws, and trees whispered secrets of rebellion. To pursue Robin Hood was to enter a world where the hunter could swiftly become the hunted, where the very air would soon seem to conspire with the outlaw. Yet, despite the unease that gripped them, none dared to voice opposition. They understood all too well the consequences of crossing the sheriff, a man whose wrath was as legendary as his cunning. Fear of the outlaw paled in comparison to the dread of the sheriff's displeasure. A man who held their lives in his grasp as easily as one might hold a quill. And so, with a heavy sense of foreboding, the hunt began. Soldiers and mercenaries ventured forth into the countryside, their movements casting ripples of alarm through villages and hamlets. They questioned every traveller, inspected every wagon, their eyes ever watchful for any sign of Robin Hood. Yet, despite their efforts, the outlaw remained elusive, a ghost, a legend among the greenery, a myth that refused to be caged. In Nottingham, the sheriff waited, his mind a labyrinth of plots and schemes, each one a thread in the web he wove around Robin Hood. But he was patient, for he knew that time was a weapon like any other, and in the deepening shadows of his chamber, his resolve hardened. Robin Hood would be found. Justice, as decreed by the Sheriff of Nottingham, would be served. in the heart of Sherwood Forest, Robin learned to live off the land, to hunt and forage and find shelter in the deep green heart of the forest. He discovered hidden glades and secret streams, places where he could rest and heal and gather his strength. And slowly, word began to spread of the outlaw of Sherwood Forest. The legend, the shadow that lived in the woods. And one evening, as Robin came out from the shadows of a tree, he approached the narrow bridge spanning the swift-flowing stream. A towering figure stepped out from the shadows of the trees. The man was built like an ox, with his arms thick as tree trunks, and a shaggy beard that obscured much of his weathered face. "Hold up there, scrawny," the big man called out, his voice a deep, rumbling growl. "This here's my bridge. You want to cross it? You've got to pay the toll." Robin eyed the man warily, taking in the massive quarterstaff gripped in his meaty fists. "I don't have any money," he said, keeping his tone even. "But I need to cross, so how about you let me pass, and we'll both go our separate ways." The big man let out a bark of laughter, the sound harsh and grating. "You don't get it. You don't get it, do you, boy? This is my territory. Nobody crosses without my say-so." Robin bristled at the insult, his hand tightening on the hilt of his sword. "I'm not looking for trouble," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "So how about we settle this like men? You and me, one-on-one." The big man's eyes narrowed, and he hefted his quarterstaff menacingly. "You sure you want to do this, boy? I ain't gonna go easy on you just 'cause you're a scrawny little thing." Robin drew his sword, the blade rasping against the leather of his scabbard. "I wouldn't want you to," he said, a reckless grin spreading across his face. The two men circled each other warily, their weapons held at the ready. The big man made the first move, his staff whistling through the air with frightening speed. But Robin was quick, dodging aside and launching a counter-strike that forced his opponent to stumble back a step. They traded blows back and forth, the clack of wood on steel ringing out through the forest. Despite his size, the big man was surprisingly agile, his staff a blur of motion as he parried Robin's attacks. But Robin was no slouch himself, and he gave as good as he got. He ducked and wove like a boxer, his sword darting in and out like a serpent's tongue. He scored a glancing blow on the big man's ribs, then another on his thigh, drawing a grunt of pain from his opponent. For a moment, it looked like Robin might actually win. But then, the big man rallied, his staff moving in a dizzying pattern of feints and strikes that left Robin reeling. A blow to the knee sent the young outlaw stumbling, and a follow-up strike to the chest knocked the wind from his lungs, sending Robin into the water under the bridge. He looked up to see the big man looming over him, his staff raised for a killing blow. But then, to Robin's surprise, the man hesitated. "You're a scrappy little fella, aren't you?" he said, a grudging note of respect in his voice. "What's your name?" Robin pushed himself up from the water, wincing at the pain in his ribs. "Robin," he said, his voice hoarse. "Robin of Locksley." The big man's eyes widened in recognition. You're not really Robin Hood, the outlaw." "Well, I'll be damned. You are real then." He lowered his staff, then reached down and hauled Robin back onto his feet. "My name's John Little, but folks round here call me Little John." Robin couldn't help but grin. Little John. It's a bit ironic, isn't it? John shrugged, a wry smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "What can I say? I like a good joke as much as the next man." He then clamped Robin on the shoulder, nearly sending the younger man stumbling again. "Tell you what, Robin, I reckon we could make a pretty good team." you and me. Robin looked up at the man, seeing past the gruff exterior to the kindness and loyalty beneath. I reckon we could, John, he said, clasping the man's forearm in a warrior's grip. I reckon we could, indeed. As Robin and Little John made their way through the dense undergrowth of Sherwood Forest, sunlight casting eerie shadows across their faces, the big man turned to his companion with a gleam in his eye. I was actually in here today because I heard there'd be some wealthy traveller passing through these woods. Just about this time, I think, Little John said, his voice low and conspiratorial. Maybe we could relieve him of some of that burden, if you catch my meaning. Robin's eyebrows shot up, a slow grin spreading across his face. Is that so? Well, it would be a shame to let such an opportunity pass us by, wouldn't it? Little John chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound that echoed through the trees. Aye, that it would. So what say you, Robin? Shall we pay this rich man a little visit? Robin's grin turned predatory, his eyes glinting with anticipation. Lead the way, my little friend. The two men melted into the shadows of the forest, moving with the silent grace of predators on the hunt. They found a spot overlooking the road, concealed by a thick tangle of brambles and vines, and settled in to wait. Time seemed to crawl by. The only sound the distant chirping of birds and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. But then, just as Robin was starting to grow restless, the sound of hoofbeats echoed through the trees. The two outlaws tensed, their hands tightening on their weapons as they peered through the foliage. And there, riding down the road with an air of regal arrogance, was their quarry. The man was dressed in robes of the finest scarlet silk, embroidered with gold thread and studded with glittering jewels. A heavy purse hung from his belt, clinking softly with each step of his magnificent stallion. He looked every inch the wealthy nobleman, completely oblivious to the dangers that lurked in the shadows. Robin and Little John exchanged a glance, a silent communication passing between them. Then, with a burst of speed, they exploded from the undergrowth, their weapons flashing in the sunlight. The nobleman's eyes widened in shock and fear as the two outlaws bore down on him. But, to Robin's surprise, he didn't try to flee. Instead, he leaped from his horse with a cat-like grace, drawing a gleaming sword from beneath his robes. Robin and Little John circled the man warily, their own weapons held at the ready. But this nobleman was no ordinary traveller. He moved with the fluid grace of a trained fighter, his blade darting and weaving like a serpent's tongue. Little John charged forward with a roar, his quarterstaff whistling through the air. But the nobleman sidestepped the blow with a contemptuous ease, his sword flickering out to catch the big man on the side of the head. Little John crumpled to the ground, his staff falling from his nerveless fingers. Robin felt a surge of anger at the sight of his friend lying unconscious on the forest floor. He lunged forward, his own sword clashing against the nobleman's blade in a shower of sparks. The two men traded blows back and forth, their swords moving in a deadly dance. Robin was a skilled swordsman, but he quickly realized that he was outmatched. The nobleman was fast and strong, his blade seeming to be everywhere at once. Finally, with a deft twist of his wrist, the nobleman sent Robin's sword flying from his grip. The outlaw stumbled back, his hands raised in surrender as the point of the nobleman's blade came to rest against his throat. "Well, well," the nobleman said, a hint of amusement in his cultured voice. "It seems the famous Robin Hood is not quite as formidable as the stories would have us believe." Robin's eyes narrowed, his mind racing as he tried to find a way out of this predicament. But then, to his shock, the nobleman lowered his sword and took a step back. "Peace, Robin of Locksley," he said, a wry smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I am not your enemy. Robin stared at the man in confusion, his brow furrowed. Then, who are you? The nobleman chuckled. A rich, throaty sound. My name is Will Scarlet, he said, sweeping into a mocking bow. And as for these fancy robes, well, let's just say that a wealthy traveler won't be needing them anymore. Robin's eyes widened in understanding, a slow grin spreading across his face. You robbed him before we could. Will Scarlet shrugged, a mischievous glint in his eye. What else can I say? I have a nose for opportunity. Robin threw back his head and laughed, the sound echoing through the trees. Well met, Will Scarlet, he said, clasping the man's arm in a warrior's grip. But tell me, what brings you to Sherwood Forest? Will's smile turned serious, his gaze intense. I came seeking you. Robin Hood, he said. I have heard tales of your deeds in the shadows. I guess I wanted to see if the legend was true. Robin looked at the man appraisingly, taking in the fierce determination in his eyes and the strength in his bearing. He glanced over at Little John, who was starting to stir on the ground. Then he glanced back at Will. We could use a man of your skills, he said, a grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. And it seems you already have a taste for our line of work. So, what say you, Will Scarlet? Will's answering grin was fierce and bright, his eyes shining with excitement. Aye, he said, clasping Robin's arm in a firm grip. I will join you, Robin Hood, and together we will make the rich and the powerful tremble at the sound of our very names. And with that, a new legend was born. The legend of Robin Hood and his merry men, the scourge of the Sheriff of Nottingham, and the champions of the downtrodden. And as they melted back into the shadows of Sherwood Forest, ready to begin their next adventure, Robin knew that he had found more than just a new companion. He had found a true friend, a brother in arms who would stand by his side through thick and thin. And with Will Scarlet and Little John at his side, he knew that there was nothing they couldn't accomplish, no injustice they couldn't right. But this, Robin knew, this was only the beginning, and in time, the rich and the Sheriff of Nottingham wouldn't know what hit them.